A black glove. That's it. That's the only physical evidence investigators had in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, found 2 miles from her home. Sitting in the dirt, like someone dropped it in a hurry. For 3 weeks, this glove was everything. It was the lead, the one thread that could unravel this entire case. Because that glove, authorities said it appeared to match the one worn by the masked man caught on Nancy's doorbell camera. The same day, she vanished. DNA was recovered. It was run through the national database. And tonight, we know exactly who that glove belongs to. But instead of closing this case, the answer just made everything more confusing. NewsNation's Brian Entin is live on the ground in Tucson.
Yeah, the second part is a really good question. We know that it belongs to a restaurant worker. It is a restaurant worker in the area where Nancy Guthrie lives, which is where I am right now. But the sheriff is making very clear that this has no connection to the Nancy Guthrie case. So they are not considered a suspect, and I've reported, I mean, these gloves are popular with chefs and people who work in restaurants, but in terms of how they connected it to the restaurant worker, we don't know, and it's a real thing to think about because we were told that there were no hits in CODIS, but then how did they have the DNA of the restaurant worker to compare against the DNA on the glove? That I don't know, Jesse.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. And look, this is another aspect of this investigation that we kind of have a question mark about, which brings me to my next point. You have some news here about the Cajun Navy, okay? Now, Brian, the Cajun Navy, you and I both know, have been part of investigations before. They're this nonprofit organization. They do great work, particularly with disaster search and rescue. They have offered to help here, but apparently they have gotten no response from the sheriff's office. Now, I understand you've seen their plan. What can you tell us? And second, why wouldn't the Pima County Sheriff's Office want their help unless, I don't know, they didn't get their message?
Yeah, well, they've definitely gotten the message because they've been here trying to talk to the sheriff for about a week. And we knew that, but today for the first time I actually saw and was given their 42-page operational plan, which is very, very detailed, Jesse. I mean, they have 24 canines that they can bring in that can, find human remains. It's a lot of former law enforcement that work these volunteer jobs. Just want to search, and they're willing to search wherever the sheriff tells them to search, out in the desert, near Nancy's home. It doesn't matter to them. This is the 42-page plan that they presented to the sheriff, and they say they still have not gotten a response. I spoke tonight to a sergeant with the sheriff's office who is also the president of the union there, so he's allowed to speak to us, who really doesn't understand why the sheriff is not taking them up on this opportunity to search. Listen to what he told me.
If the sheriff is uncomfortable with them, working the area close into the home, there's certainly other areas that perhaps they could be beneficial, and more bodies and more help is always better than less.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it would hurt.
No, I don't think so. And perhaps they could solve another crime. If the assets are here and they're willing to volunteer their time, I say why not use it.
Why do you think that they haven't gotten a response?
I think we addressed some of that in our previous conversation about priorities with Sheriff Nanos. He likes to control things, and I imagine that's some of that.
Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in Tucson, Arizona exactly 3 weeks ago today. The last known footage of any kind, her own doorbell camera. A masked figure, face completely covered, appears at her home the very day she went missing. Investigators have never identified this person. They have never explained what this person wanted, and to this day, that masked figure remains unidentified. Then, roughly 10 days into the investigation, that black glove is recovered about 2 miles from Nancy's home. Authorities say it appears to match the glove on the masked man's hand. That's not a throwaway line. You don't say a glove appears to match unless you've done a careful visual comparison, and it holds up. DNA is extracted from the glove. It's run through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. Millions of profiles, convicted offenders, criminal suspects, across every state in the country. No match. At that point, the lead goes cold. Standard procedure. Except it doesn't. Because days after announcing no CODIS hit, the sheriff's office turns around and says they have identified the glove's owner, a restaurant worker, living in Nancy's neighborhood. And before you ask, yes, these black gloves are standard in commercial kitchens. That part is plausible. These are popular with chefs and food service workers across the country. The sheriff is now saying this restaurant worker has no connection to the Nancy Guthrie case whatsoever, not a suspect. But here is where NewsNation's Brian Entin, live from Tucson, stops and asks the question nobody else thought to ask. There were no hits in CODIS, but then how do they have the DNA of the restaurant worker to compare against the DNA on the glove? Read that again. If this restaurant worker has no criminal record, no prior DNA profile anywhere in the system, then investigators would have needed to obtain his DNA through a completely separate channel. Either they approached him directly and asked for a voluntary sample, an extraordinary step that has never been publicly disclosed, or they obtained his DNA through some other method they haven't explained, or there is information about this identification that the public simply has not been told. Anchor Jesse, right there on air, immediately recognized it too, calling it a good point and describing it as, quote, another aspect of this investigation we have a question mark about. 2 journalists, same broadcast, flagging the exact same gap in real time. The sheriff's office response? A generic statement about private searches respecting law enforcement. The DNA question, not addressed, not even acknowledged. That silence is not nothing. That is a question this investigation owes the public a direct answer to. And the DNA question doesn't exist in isolation, because this same sheriff's office is making another decision right now that is raising serious eyebrows. The Cajun Navy, a highly respected nonprofit with a long track record in disaster search and rescue, has been trying to meet with the Pima County Sheriff's Office for over a week. They submitted a 42-page operational plan. Brian Entin obtained and reviewed that document on camera tonight. What's inside it? 24 trained search canines, thermal UAV drone reconnaissance, former law enforcement volunteers, and a clear commitment to operate entirely under the sheriff's authority. The sheriff leads. The Cajun Navy simply adds resources at his direction. No cost, no conflict, no interference, no response. Entin went further. He spoke tonight to a sergeant within the sheriff's own department who said this on the record. The sheriff is uncomfortable with them working the area close to the home. More bodies, more help is always better. A sergeant inside the same department saying publicly that more help would be better and pointing directly at the sheriff's need for control as the reason it isn't happening. That is not a minor detail. That is someone inside this investigation telling us something is wrong. And then there is the resource picture, which Entin also nailed down for the first time tonight. What began as virtually the entire Pima County Sheriff's Detective Division working the Nancy Guthrie case has now been scaled back to a formal task force, 4 detectives and 1 sergeant, operating jointly with the FBI out of the Tucson field office. The FBI involvement is the one genuinely positive development here. Earlier in this investigation, there were reported tensions between the sheriff and federal agents. The fact that they are now operating as a unified task force suggests those issues have been resolved and federal resources are now fully in play. But Entin's read on the overall picture was honest and it was blunt. It's hard to see it as a welcome sign when you're reducing the amount of manpower working the case. Fewer detectives, rejected outside help, unanswered questions about basic investigative steps. That is the reality of where this case stands tonight, 3 weeks. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, the masked man on her doorbell camera still unidentified, and the one lead that gave this case its greatest moment of hope, the black glove, the DNA, the promise that an identity was close, has now produced more questions than it answered. Brian Entin is still in Tucson. He is still on the ground. He is still asking the right questions, and the sheriff's office is still not answering them. We will keep following every development in this case. If you have any information on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, contact the Pima County Sheriff's Office immediately. Subscribe so you don't miss the next update.